This video is to help train people to score proficiency applications, either the local, the regional, or the state level. We're very fortunate in FFA to have proficiency contests. Proficiencies give students a chance to earn recognition for their work with supervised agricultural experience programs. Sometimes these are students who are very hardworking, who have a very high skill level, but maybe they're not public speakers. Maybe they're not going to win the employment skills contest, but they have incredible skills and they're going to be leaders in the agricultural industry for years to come. And so we want to make sure that we get those applications scored correctly and that we give every student a fair chance with that. So we're going to share some tips and tricks today. None of this is rocket science, but if you've never scored applications before, or maybe it's been a year or two, it's certainly worth spending a couple minutes to watch this and pay attention to it. We'll go ahead and share a PowerPoint, and this will be available on our website to help teachers and others as they're scoring. So we start to think about scoring applications. There's some basics we want to go over. The first thing we always want to mention is that student learning is the most important thing. If we don't get student learning right, nothing else matters. So we should always be evaluating what student has learned the most and how are they applying that learning to their project. The second thing that we always want to emphasize is that a good application tells a story. So you start out with the first page and you start learning about the students. You don't know them. By the time you finish the application, you have a really good handle on who the student is, what they've done, and how they've done it. And a good application doesn't leave any holes. When you're finished reading it, you understand completely. The third thing is an application should show growth over time. We'll talk about that more as we go in terms of what that might look like. But for an entrepreneurship student, the business should have grown over time. For a placement student, either their hours or their income or their skill level should have grown over time. Again, we'll talk about that as we go. The fourth thing, the application needs to be reasonable and believable. And anything that's odd in that application needs to be explained. Now, we always have exceptional students who are doing different things, but anything that is different or strange or maybe a little unbelievable needs to be explained in the course of the application. And as long as we explain it, it's perfectly fine to have that. Final thing to mention is the application must fit the area. If you have questions about an application fitting the area, I would encourage you to look at the proficiency area descriptions available from National FFA. That is the authority on whether an application fits. So it can be a great application, but if it doesn't fit the area, it probably shouldn't win and shouldn't advance. So let's start out and talk about entrepreneurship applications. I think entrepreneurship applications probably give folks the most heartburn. They ask the most questions about that. But entrepreneurship applications are really not that complicated. Again, we're just looking at what student has developed the best business project with the resources that they had to work with. We start out on entrepreneurship forums. These are the high point areas, as I call them, the things you would focus the most on. So we start out and we look at the SAE size, scope, and responsibilities. What we're looking for there is a complete description of what they've done that shows growth. If, for example, I have a lawn mowing project, my description should tell you how many yards I mowed. It should break down how many of those were residential, how many of them were commercial. It could include things like, do I have employees? Could include, did I buy any new equipment during the year? If I added a service, for example, if I started out just mowing, but I've added maybe some basic landscaping or snow removal, or now I'm seeding and spraying yards, any of those things, definitely want to include that in that description. If it was a swine project, I would be telling you things like, where am I buying my pigs from? What am I feeding them on? When am I selling them? How am I selling them? If I'm selling show pigs, that description probably would tell me that. If I'm selling feeder pigs, then that's going to show that, and it's going to, the rest of the form is going to look a little different. What I'm getting at is that you as a judge read that description and you start to get an idea of what you're looking for in the rest of the form. Then we look at the income and expense statement. And typically the income and expense statement sort of scares people because it's a lot of numbers on a page. And I don't know what they mean. I'm going to explain a few things you want to look for on that. But we're looking for income and expenses and inventory that are accurate and that are reasonable for the project. And so if I tell you on the size and scope page that I have 20 cows, then I should have income and expenses that is reasonable for 20 cows. Now, we can argue over, does it cost X number of dollars to feed a cow for a year? We don't want to get too deep in the weeds of that, but certainly we're not feeding a cow for a year for $25. And so we have to be providing feed somewhere. And so we'd be looking for those kind of things to make sure that that's showing up. The final thing we want to pay a lot of attention to in an entrepreneurship form is the skill development. We're looking for 10 competencies there that demonstrate skills appropriate to the size and scope of the project. If, for example, I tell you in my form that I had the world champion market goat last year, you would be looking for some fairly high skills in relation to having the grand champion market goat. If I tell you that I've been mowing yards for 2 years and I'm doing it all with a push mower, maybe you're not looking for such high skill levels there. But again, there's going to be 10 of those. The first 5 of those skills should be directly related to the area that we're in. So if it's an animal project, those first 5 would be animal science skills. If it's a plant-based project, the first 5 would be plant related skills. Beyond that, the other 5 could be in that same area. So you could have 10 animal science skills for an animal project, but often you're going to see maybe an animal skill, a plant skill, a mechanic skill there because they're working on equipment, and all of that's fine. But they should really in their descriptions tell you what those skills are and how those skills have impacted their project over time. So as we keep going, we keep reading an entrepreneurship form, these are the questions that really need to be answered in the course of the form to have a good one. First question, how did you build the business? If I grew from 2 yards to 20 yards, how did I build that business? What steps did I take to grow that business? Related to that, what management decisions have I made? So if I made the decision to buy a new lawnmower, how did I reach that decision? How did I get to that point? What did that look like? How did I get to the decision to buy that mower? Number 3 is very, very, very important for entrepreneurship. Where and how did we secure land and equipment? So if I have 20 cows, I have to have a place to have those cows. Am I trading labor with my dad for cows? Is grandma giving me her farm so I can raise my cows? But where is that coming from? If I tell you that I'm growing 30 acres of corn, where and how am I getting the equipment to grow that corn? Maybe I own the equipment, but often I'm going to be trading labor with dad or uncle or grandpa or someone to do that. Any of those options are fine as long as we are actually outlining that somewhere and explaining how we did that. And then the 4th thing we always want an answer to is, what does the student learn in the course of this project? I'd much rather see an application where a student's honest and says that, I messed up, I made a wrong decision about fertilizer last year and it cost me some money, than say to have one that says everything's been perfect all the way along, because any of us who've been involved in agriculture in any way, shape, or form can testify to the fact that it's not always perfect and it's not always great every year. So talk about the income and expense page, because again, that page sort of throws people off and makes people lose their minds sometimes, but it's not that complicated. On line 1D, we're looking for appropriate cash sales shown. So if I tell you I had 2 lawns that I mowed every week, do I have cash sales showing up on line 1D for each year that sort of match and track with what the project is? If I tell you I had 20 cows, do I have cash sales that are in line with what I would be selling 20 cows? Line 2C and 2D is very, very important. Am I showing appropriate expenses there? So 2C would be cash expenses. 2D would be expenses where I'm trading labor with a relative, with a friend, with someone. and those will be showing up on line 2D. There's all kinds of ways to think about that. If you had questions about appropriate expenses, you could always go to the UK College of Ag website and check out their enterprise budgets. I think most people are fairly familiar and comfortable enough to say, yeah, these expenses are pretty reasonable for a cattle project or corn project or raising puppies, but we want to see appropriate expenses there. We want to look to see if labor exchanges are accounted for. So if I told you in my description that I'm trading labor with my dad for equipment for 30 acres of corn, then I should be accounting for that with a labor exchange. Line 1F would show that income, if you will, for the labor exchange, and then 2D plus 4B should generally equal line 1F. There's times when that's not the case, but generally speaking, that's true. And that's just showing that labor exchange as completely offsetting itself. So it's not cash in or cash out. So it should generally be equal. And then line 4H is net non-current transactions. That number should typically be negative because of depreciation. So anytime we have a capital asset, that asset is going to go down in value over time. And so we would expect that to show a negative number there. What's reasonable in terms of depreciation? It just depends. Depends on what kind of livestock we're talking about, what kind of equipment we're talking about. If we have a brand new truck, we're going to have some pretty steep depreciation there. If we have a Ford 3000 tractor, the depreciation on that is going to be fairly low and fairly slight because, unless you're wearing the tires off those tractors, they're not going to zero. The only thing we're doing is maybe wearing something out like tires or what have you. So, but we would want to see at least some negative there. And again, the higher priced newer capital assets that we have, the more depreciation we would expect to be seeing. I want to show you, this is from a national winning proficiency application a couple years ago. This is his description that he would have had. This is his size and scope. And so you see what he's talking about, what Brent Moore did from Garrett County. Brent had a great proficiency, but Brent sort of had a mobile tire repair business. And so you read in the first year, he's got 15 clients bringing their tires to him. He tells you he's exchanging labor with mom and dad for use of their shop, and he's doing word-of-mouth advertising. So in terms of what we would expect on his income and expense page, we would expect, a little income from 15 clients. We would expect some expenses in terms of the materials he's buying, inner tubes and valve stems and things like that. Wouldn't expect a ton of capital assets because he's using dad's shop and dad's equipment. Probably doesn't own a ton of stuff that he's using, maybe a few tools or something. So we get into the second year, you see he's done a mobile service. So we would be expecting to have a mobile service that he probably owns a truck. We would expect to see in that second year a jump in terms of his income, but also a jump in terms of his expenses. We're still exchanging labor, so we'd expect a labor exchange on there. And then he's talking about hanging flyers, and so we see the growth happening. In the third year, again, we see he's bought some tools. So I'd be looking and thinking there should be a capital expense for tools bought that year. And so we would see a growth in the income, a growth in the expenses, and a growth in terms of those capital assets down in section 4 of the application. Now, as you learn more about Brent's project, if you had went on through the application, you would see that it was never a high budget kind of deal. It wasn't a brand new service truck. He was using a lot of used tools, a lot of small things. I mean, in a mobile tire repair business, you're talking about an air compressor, some wrenches, impact wrenches, those kind of things. Nothing major, not tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of tools, but you would have seen if you look through the rest of his application, those things showing up. So again, for an entrepreneurship forum, those are the kind of things that we're looking at, that we're concerned with. But this page, as we start to look at this page, the summary page, it sort of tells us what we should be seeing anywhere else in the rest of the form. So we shift gears to placement. We remember that placement is when a student is working for someone else. The two big points areas, as I call them, for placement forms are size, scope, and responsibilities. And so we're showing significant growth in our responsibilities, our hours worked, or our engagement in the project over time. One of the things that I always use on this, that I've used to death, but if I started out as a stock boy at Tractor Supply, as a sophomore, say, and by the time I'm doing this proficiency, I've moved up, I'm driving a forklift, I'm assistant manager, I'm helping, assemble bush hogs out back, we could say that I've had a pretty significant growth in terms of my responsibilities. Now, maybe my hours have not changed much, because I was working 20 hours a week when I was a sophomore, and I'm working 20 hours a week now, but my responsibilities has grown. For some students, we may see that their position has stayed the same. Maybe they started out in a feed mill and they're still at the feed mill, but their hours worked, their money made has grown. And if that's true, then we're very happy about that and very glad for that to happen. Again, skill development is huge on a placement form. So we're looking at those skills that they've developed, and we're looking at their impact on their future success. What have they learned to do as a course of that project? We all probably have had jobs where you were in the job for a long time, but you didn't learn much, you didn't grow much, and other jobs that really pushed you to grow and get better. And so we're looking for that kind of thing on this project. As I think about placement, there's 4 questions that I think should be answered in a good placement application. The first question, what has the student learned to do? Have they learned to drive a forklift? Have they learned to give injections? Have they learned some computer system? What is it that they've learned to do in the course of that project? What additional responsibilities have you been given in the course of that project? Very, very important that we talk about that. Number 3, how has this prepared you for a career? Now, maybe you've been working for a hog farmer and you're not planning on being a hog farmer, but what skills have you learned for that hog farmer that you're going to take with you in life and down the road in other areas? And then the final question, and I think this is just real important, why should I hire you to work for me? If you finish reading a placement form and you're ready to hire the student, that's a really good form. And that's the kind of thing that we're looking for, that we're wanting to see in these student applications. Is we get done with the application, we say, man, that's a student that I want to hire. I read one several years ago for a poultry student, and I wanted to go and buy a chicken house just so I could hire the student. That was a state winner, and it was a pretty daggone good one, and that's the kind of thing that we're looking for. Here is the placement description page for a student from Taylor County. Sort of a very typical, very traditional one. He's working at a feed mill. But we see a couple things. As we start to think about growth here, we see that the first year he worked 242 hours. The next year he worked 357 hours. I think the next year he was up in the 400 hours range. So again, we're seeing some growth in terms of what he's doing. But as we read the description, what I really want you to pay attention to here, he started out bagging feed, stacking, filling pallets, loading customer orders, completing order slips. So very basic, very entry-level feed mill. You see by the second year, he's using the office computer. He's dealing stuff with equipment. He's taking pictures to post online. And so we see that growth over time. We might, and I've not done the math on this one, but we might also see a growth in terms of the hourly wage. And certainly a student who's been there 4 or 5 years and is telling us that they've become much more valuable as an employee, it might be worth doing the math there to make sure that we've actually been paid fairly well. Want to say just a quick side note, we do have some unpaid placement students. We don't want to penalize those students for being unpaid placements. Some students, that's their only opportunity to have an SAE is an unpaid placement. Some of those students, if you think about for a small animal, particularly if a student wants to be a veterinarian, Doing an unpaid internship in high school with a vet is a good way for them to get some experience, to learn about that. And then also it looks good on a vet school application. So we wouldn't penalize that student for doing that. But sometimes it's worth asking the question, why did you remain unpaid for 3 or 4 years? Sometimes that's legitimate. It's the family farm and mom and dad are just not paying them. And that's okay. We're not mad at the student for that. That's just a fact of life. But we always probably ask that question if a student's unpaid for 4 or 5 years. But again, with something where it's legitimately volunteerism, or they're working in a family business, family situation, mom and dad are not paying them, then we wouldn't expect there to be payment there. And that's probably most of us have dealt with that at some point. We thought maybe mom and dad should have paid us for something, but mom and dad didn't think that. So again, we don't penalize the student for that, but we do sort of maybe pay attention to it and take a harder look if they've worked unpaid for 4 or 5 years. Is there something in the form that explains that to us and helps us figure out what that is? Mention to you quickly a limit on hours. There's not an official limit on hours, but just some numbers to sort of throw out there. 2,080 hours is 40 hours a week every week. That might be possible for some students if they don't do anything else. We all know a student who all they do is work. We hear that all they do is work. Well, if all they do is work, then that may be possible. But, if the form shows that they play 3 sports and they volunteer 200 hours, we would sort of expect that number to be lower than 2,080. Generally speaking, for an in-school student, 1,500 to 1,600 hours is going to be a lot. Now, occasionally we have a student who's they graduated, and so they've been working, from June through December, and maybe they were on a farm, maybe during harvest, they were legitimately working 80 hours a week. If the form explains that, the form makes clear why that happens, that's okay. We're not mad at the student for that, but the form should definitely explain that and help us nail that down if indeed that's going to be on there. Go ahead and turn the page again and talk about research really quickly. You know that we have 3 research proficiencies: animal, plant, and integrated. On research forms, we're looking for the abstract that's going to have the procedure and the conclusion. It's going to clearly outline the purpose and the process of the research. And then the skill development is going to tell us what kind of skills, appropriate skills they've developed. I think for a research form, we go back to maybe 7th grade science when we think about what is the scientific method. We want to clearly outline a research problem. I think it's better when that problem is something real life. Now, occasionally we're going to have a student who's going to do one on which kind of popcorn pops the best. That's okay. But generally we would say a student who's researching, which protein source leads to the most growth in cattle. That's the kind of research that we would really like to see and want to see there. But that abstract is going to outline for us that procedure. How did they do the research? What conclusion did they reach? How did they get there? And even though most of us are not scientists, we know that in any kind of research we should have a variable, we should have controls, all those kind of things. And so we would be looking for that, at least paying attention to that as we went through. Questions need answer on research. What did you research? Why did you choose to research it? How did you conduct the research? What were your findings? And then I think this last one is really, really important. How can your findings be applied to real life? If a student did some kind of research on fertilizer and they applied it to their pumpkin crop, I think that's phenomenal. And that's the kind of thing that we should be encouraging and looking for in our applications. I always want to talk about photos. Photos are only 6 points out of 100, and so you say maybe they're not that important, but a picture's worth 1,000 words. And in the case of proficiency applications, I think often the photos make it or break it. First of all, we're looking for 6 clear photos. The student in Kentucky, the student is supposed to be in 5 of those photos. The photos should be showing or demonstrating some kind of high level of skill. And how we know that often is what the caption says. And so the caption, the photo may be something very simple, but the caption may help us understand how that is a high-level skill and how the students develop that. And again, the photo should confirm what's said in the application. If the student says that they had the Grand Champion Market Goat at the North American, I'd like to see a picture of the Grand Champion Market Goat. If the student says that they have a brand new zero-turn mower, I'd like to see a picture of a zero-turn. If the application says that they're mowing with a push mower, that's great. Picture should be with a push mower, not a zero-turn. And so we start to see that the pictures support what we're doing. Again, my advice to teachers, if there's anything that's in the application that maybe people are going to question or doubt, I'm going to put a picture of it in there. If I say that I have a brand new tractor, you better believe there's going to be a picture of that brand new tractor showing up in the application so that I know that it legitimately does exist. I want to show you a couple of photo examples now. I love this picture, but in terms of a proficiency picture, if this picture is in there and the caption is, "Here I am with some of my cows," that doesn't tell us a lot, does it? I mean, we know that there's a student, we know that there's cows. Okay, but that's all we can tell. Now, on the other hand, if this caption said something to the effect of, at least once a day, I check my cows. I'm looking for signs of any kind of distress, cows that are standing away from the herd, things like that, and talk about the things that they're looking for. And then maybe even if they went into how they would, if they found a cow that was off by herself, how they would doctor her. They could talk about how they're checking for new calves and they're putting ear tags in when they're born, or they're whatever it is that they're doing. So you could use this picture and have a really good, yep, get the point kind of deal. Or if you just put this picture in and say, "Here I am with some of my cows," you sort of wasted a picture. Now, would we score them down, like take a point away from them because of this photo and this caption? Maybe not, but you might start thinking this is half a point instead of a full point with this caption. Again, with a good caption, you could get that back to a full point. And even though it's only a point, it may confirm something else in the application and help you as a judge to say, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt on some other things. This photo and this caption is what we're looking for, though. Again, you see the caption, the photo is showing a high-level skill. I don't know if you can see the picture or not, but the dog is actually got a mask, and so is under anesthesia. And you can see here, part of my work is preparing animals for surgery. After the animal's sedated, I shave the hair around the incision, wash the area, and apply disinfectant. This allows the vet to begin surgery immediately after entering the room. Again, for a small animal proficiency, or a vet science actually, for vet science, we would say that's pretty good. That's the kind of thing that we're looking for on that proficiency application. And that confirms to us the student really does have a high level of skill, and everything that they've said in the form probably is true. I want to mention just real quick the supplemental page. Every form can have, and I think it's worth, I believe it's worth 3 points, a supplemental page. Supplemental page should do a couple things. Number one, it should, really not one thing, it should support what's in the application. It can literally be anything that supports what's in the application. Some examples, and this is not a exclusive list, but could be advertising samples. If I have a lawn care business and I'm telling you about my advertising, maybe I put in a sample of my advertising. Could be a list of all the equipment I own, be fine, or a list of all the animals. Could be a copy of a lease agreement or a loan agreement. Could be a copy of a certification, a copy of an award. Again, if I had the World Champion Market Goat, maybe it's a picture of that, a news article about me and my World Champion Market Goat. So those are the kind of things that we are looking for as we start to think about a proficiency application. Want to encourage you, we do have on our website, we have the rubrics and the score sheets for proficiency applications. I encourage you to read through those and pay attention to those. There's some good stuff in there. Those are divided up into high points, medium points, and low points. And so, for example, something's worth 10 points. You're going to read that high description and figure out, does it fit in there? Is it a 9 or 10 point answer? Or is it a 6 or 7 or whatever it fits? The other resource that I think that's on our website that's pretty helpful, again, is that area description that's going to tell you what really goes in diversified ag or what goes in diversified crop or whatever the case might be. Get a lot of questions about, well, does this application fit ag processing or ag services? Well, the answer is that the descriptions and the pictures are what determine that. And so generally, if it's ag services, the pictures and the descriptions are going to fit ag services. If it's not, then you start to do that. So you think about, does it fit? Does it not fit? You should be looking at those descriptions, looking at those photos, again, reading the description, and then you get to decide it really does fit or it really doesn't. Again, I want to thank you for your time and your commitment to helping judge proficiency applications. If I can be of help to you at any point in time, feel free to reach out by email, matt.colliff@education.ky.gov, or call me at 502-564-3472. Thanks again, and good luck judging proficiency applications.